Whoop. How you like that? Did you know that tomatoes have lips?
What?
Tomatoes. Tomato plants have lips. About 60,000 of them per plant. And that's a picture of what you'd be kissing if you kissed a tomato. What's that have to do with anything? It kind of goes to what I mean, or what the Bible means when it says fear the Lord. I want to leave this, tomato lips, with you. And I want to go to the book of Proverbs. And I want us to look at that passage that we read, that Michael read. And I want to back up a little bit. I want to start with the beginning of this book of Proverbs, because I'm wanting to try and give information for people who don't believe in God. Give reasons why it's important for us to first believe that there is a God that created a tomato plant with 60,000 lips. You know, there's a reason for everything in creation. There's a plan. There's a blueprint. There's a genius behind it. There's a genius behind this book that we call the Bible that so many people can't seem to recognize. They look for all of the flaws, and I guarantee you they're going to find something they think is a flaw. But in this first chapter of Proverbs, here's the way the wisest man that ever lived, other than the Lord Jesus. This is what he writes to begin his book of how-to. It's a book of what works and doesn't work. It's a book that tells you how you can succeed or fail in life. It's a book that tells you how to get along with your fellow man and how to recognize God in all things. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. We have so many places in the Bible that give us instruction, and you know, I've discovered a difference in why people believe in one person and not another. We've talked before about historical figures, about people like Albert Einstein. Do you believe? Raise your hand if you believe Albert Einstein is a real person that lived in this world. Look around, is there anybody not raising their hand and does not believe that Albert Einstein was a real person? You don't believe it? Oh, okay. Now, he was a real living person. All that frizzy hair and everything. He was a person that we can read about, we can learn from, we can know that he did what is said about him in this world. And I don't know of anybody that even questions that. But here's the rub. Why is it that people believe about those things about him and not about Jesus, for instance. Because Jesus is historically attested to many, many times more than Albert Einstein. Over the period of history, Jesus has been written about and talked about and discussed by hundreds of thousands of people as opposed to Albert Einstein. But yet everybody believes in Albert. And I think I know why. Because Albert doesn't ask me to make any changes in my life. Albert has no bearing on my future. Albert just was and did. And it has nothing to do with my future, except maybe I might get blown up because of him. But other than that, there's nothing that Albert has to do with my future or my past. Yet, there's something about this person who left heaven and came to the earth and lived as a human being that requires something from me, of me, about me, to me. Everything about my existence has to do with this man named Jesus of Nazareth. Now, I want to read something to you from a website. And this, incidentally, this website is, if you want to look it up, it's called infidels.org. Infidels. Do you know what an infidel is?
Unbeliever.
Okay. Very simply, an unbeliever. It's not an agnostic. An agnostic just, I don't know. But an infidel is someone who does not believe. Okay. Now, you can probably tell that in some of the things that are written here, but I want you to read what this article begins with. It says, important. These lists are meant to identify possible problems in the Bible, especially those that are inherent in a literalist or a fundamentalist interpretation of the Bible. Keep in mind, however, that what constitutes a valid problem is to some extent a matter of opinion. To some extent, it's a matter of opinion. You may disagree that these are, in fact, genuine biblical problems, but it is the author's opinion that a perfect and, now I want you to pay attention to this. This is important. It is the writer's, let me get back to where it was. But it is the author's opinion here that a perfect and omnipotent God could, should, and would see to it that such problems did not exist in a book which she or he had inspired. In other words, they're going to tell us in their great wisdom what God should or should not be or do. Now, I'll grant you, there are some difficult things that are brought up here. And there's no question about that. And you might ask yourself, well, why didn't God write a book that every one of us could immediately see exactly what it was with no questions whatsoever? And I'm going to ask you the question, have you ever dealt with humanity? Have you ever listened to a political debate? Have you ever dealt with problems between two people that were involved in the same thing at the same time and cannot see anything alike? Have you ever dealt with that? Yep. Well, God is writing a book for us, humanity, to look at. Now, you understand who he's dealing with here. He's dealing with the same people that we can't get to see anything alike. If you take 5 people, you're going to have 7 different opinions of what it is. That makes sense? Some people can't make up their mind. So you got at least two in there that can't make up their mind about things. But here's what I want us to look at this morning that has to do with this fear of God. How many of you believe that this fear of God is trembling in your boots? Raise your hand. Is that what that's talking about? Well, I'll tell you what, if it's not, you got a problem. Because we should be trembling in our boots when we're dealing with somebody that can create a star, that can create the sun, that can create a tomato plant with 60,000 lips. We're talking about someone who can create an oak tree. Did you know that the average oak tree takes 10 million gallons of water out of the soil and spits it out through those lips in the leaves in its lifetime? 60 million gallons of water, even in dryish soil, where you could never get a gallon of water out. A plant like an oak tree can take 10 million gallons of water out and spit it out into the air and make clouds. That's what the God that we believe in did, and why we should have some trembling in our hearts when we're dealing with someone who is that powerful. You'd be crazy not to have some trembling. But is that why we do what we do when we read in the Bible that God tells us to do something? Because Proverbs says, now understand what he says and what he doesn't say. He doesn't say the fear of the Lord is the last thing that you have to do in this life. That's not what he says. He says the fear of the Lord starts it all. It's the beginning of knowledge. I had a friend who was a horse whisperer. I'm telling you, this guy could make a horse do anything. I envied his talent. He just seemed to be able to look a horse in the eye and know what it was thinking. We had a pony that we bought for Angel. His name was Wishes. The wish was that you could get a saddle on her. That was what the wish was. Because you could chase that horse for days and never get close enough to it to put a saddle on it. Pretty little thing. That was the most beautiful little pinto pony. I mean, that horse was gorgeous. But it was just as worthless as it was gorgeous. Because you couldn't get the saddle on the thing. And my friend, he had been breaking horses since he was 10 years old, I think. He said, "Do you have a BB gun?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "The first thing you got to do is teach the horse to stand still. Because you can't put a saddle on a running horse. I mean, that's just common sense. You can't do that. So the first thing you got to do is put some fear in that pony." I said, "Okay, I'm just standing here learning, so you show me what I got to do." He had the saddle on his arm, and he walked toward the pony. She bolted and took off running. He shot her right in the rump with that BB gun. Just as soon as she started running, pink, and man, she ran harder. And then she stopped. When she stopped, he started walking toward her again with the saddle on his arm. The instant she started running, he shot her again right in the rump. She bolted and took off and ran even harder. Did that 3 times. And he could walk right up to her and stick that saddle on her. She never ran again. Never. Not once. The fear of that BB gun was the beginning of her learning. She actually got to where she loved having the saddle. But she didn't love the saddle without the beginning with the fear. I was amazed. I was amazed. A BB gun. But that's not what bonded the child or the kids with the pony. The fear was just the starting point, just the point where they could start riding that horse and petting the horse. And we all start from somewhere in our learning process. Proverbs is telling us that if you don't have a sense of trembling when you're thinking about the Almighty, there's something wrong with you. Because he goes down, notice how this is written. This is written in what we call Hebrew parallelism. It's a form of Hebrew poetry that I think is the most beautiful poetry, the most lasting poetry that's anywhere in the world, because Hebrew parallelism writes not in rhyming sounds, but it rhymes meanings. It rhymes thoughts. So what he says in the first line, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Now this parallelism can either go with a thought that is the same on the second line. We'll look at some of those in just a minute. Or it can give you the opposite of that as a poetic thought. Now, what happens in other kinds of poetry if you translate it from English to French? What happens to your poetry? That's supposed to be poetic? Doesn't sound anything alike. The rhyming's all gone. You can't get a thought out of it. But this poetry, it doesn't matter what language you translate it into, it's going to have the same flow of thought that it had in the other language. So, let's read this, the whole thing. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. The opposite now. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. You know, some people just can't be taught. Some people, or what I've been talking, I've got this favorite thing I say anymore. If you get in the car and the car ding, 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 what does that mean to you? You get in the car, two people get in the car, one of them sits down, does what he's supposed to do, and takes off driving, and the other one just gets in the car and sits down, and it starts dinging. Ding, 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 ding. What does that mean? Somebody is not putting their seatbelt on. So I've got a saying there. I say, "Oh, striped one, would you put your seatbelt on, please? Don't be a zebra," because zebras can't be trained. That's what I've been told anyway. Now, that's what Solomon's saying. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. You can't tell some people something. They don't want to hear it. There's a lot of people in this world that want all the help in the world, but don't give me any advice. I don't want to hear it. Now, Solomon starts this whole book of wisdom with that thought. Some people, you just can't tell anything. So you're going to find that when people read the Bible, one of the first things that they're going to start looking for, if they don't care, they're looking for ways to disprove this book because they don't want to be told anything. That's some people. Some people do that. But that does not negate the fact that some things in this book are very difficult to understand. So my question is, why would God put very difficult stuff in here? Why do you think? Anybody got an idea about why God puts stuff that's hard to understand? Why would Jesus make the statement, unless you hate your father and mother, you can't be my disciple? Why would he say something like that? Why would he tell that woman, the Syrophoenician woman, when she came to get her daughter healed, why would he say, I don't have time for you, you're a dog? It's not good to throw the children's bread to the dogs, woman. Why would he say that to her? There are some things that are so difficult to understand, you have to stop. You have to ponder. You have to look at the situation. Why would he do that? Anybody want to venture a guess? I mean, there's so many of those kind of things in the Bible that when people read it that don't want to believe the Bible, that's what they use to say, this can't be from an omnipotent, loving God. As a matter of fact, they say that about Jesus. How could he be so cruel to that woman? How could a loving God take a man who he says is the best on earth and treat him like he treated Job? That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound like somebody who loves everybody. Unless you understand the reasoning behind it. Do you suppose, now just think about this for a second. Do you suppose that someone who has the wisdom to create not only a star, but galaxies with a couple 100 billion stars in it, and then a couple 100 billion galaxies with a couple 100 billion stars in them, they has that kind of wisdom, that kind of understand, that kind of knowledge, that kind of ability to put things together and make them work? Do you just suppose that there might be a reason he has for doing things that we can't see? I mean, that ought to be the first order of business when we start questioning this person that it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It ought to make me stop and think, maybe there's something he sees that I don't see. Possibly. So, I think I'm going to follow Solomon here. And I'm going to say, I think I'll wait to question. I'm just going to try and figure out what it is that he had in mind. And why some things sound so difficult. You know, I think I've got that thing figured out about Jesus and the woman. When he says, she was insistent. My daughter needs you. More than one time, Jesus had something like that happen. And he turns to his disciples. And he says, do you see that faith right there? Do you see that woman's faith? How much she believes? And how much she's willing to go through to get what she knows only I can give her? How about Job? Who else in the world could God call upon to show you and me, thousands of years later, that it doesn't matter? Nothing else except our faith and trust in God is all that matters.
That's right.
It doesn't matter how somebody treats us. It doesn't matter what happens to us. What matters is how we deal with people and our God, because here is two laws that are really one law that we have to learn while we're here. When Jesus was asked, what is the greatest and the foremost commandment in the law? They were trying to trap him. They were trying to get him to say, oh, the Sabbath or this or that. But you remember I said that Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived except for Jesus? I really believe that. Now, the Lord listens to this question. And he knows what they're trying to do. He knows they're trying to trap him with an answer that they're going to be able to say, there he is, let's get him, let's crucify him. Or he's not a valid teacher. So what he says to them is there's really only one law. That is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. But there's a second one that's like that. And that is to love your neighbor as yourself. Here's something that I think you ought to think about, ponder. That we have a two-directional responsibility. One toward God, and that right there is what is called godliness. That's the proper attitude in flying. Jake, what is attitude? What does that mean?
Keeping your wings low. Yeah.
Okay, keeping your wings level. Well, in this case, you got one wing, okay? And you got a vertical stabilizer. And this vertical stabilizer points directly to God. That is godliness. Guess what happens if this goes this way or this way? What happens to this one? You know what happened with Moses? Moses, very likely, maybe not, let's not talk about Jesus here, but let's talk about just plain old human beings. Give me two people that are at the top of the faithful list. Somebody tell me, who's the number one faithful person? Huh? Where would Moses be in that bunch? Man, I'll tell you what, you're not giving Moses any credit. For 80 years, Moses did the right thing. Always did the right thing. Till right there at the last. Now, you ever get frustrated with people? Do you suppose dealing with those people in the wilderness for 40 years made him just a tad bit frustrated? I think they were stomping on his last nerve. And he says, must we, God and I, always deal with you? Wow. Okay, Mr. Moses. He just elevated himself to a pretty lofty position there. He lost his godliness. And in that process, he was having God down where he could put his arm around him and looking down at those people. We need to remember that there are two laws. To love God with all of our heart and our soul and our mind, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Not get those things out of kilter. Now, how does that start? That starts by having the proper awe and reverence for our Maker. I want to go to Psalms, and let's go back to the passage that we had read. Psalms chapter 33 here. We find it. And can't remember where we started. Okay. Let me read here. By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth all their host. He gathers the waters of the sea together as a heap. He lays up the deeps in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. And let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. You know what fear really is? It's this awe and respect that we should have for someone who has that kind of power, that kind of understanding, that kind of wisdom. Why would a lowly human being question someone who can make a star? Now, when you understand that, when you understand that he can make a tomato plant that has 60,000 lips. Have you ever seen a tomato's lips? They're so small you can't even see them. But they breathe every bit of life that goes into those tomatoes. Wow, what a genius. If we found someone who could make a pump that would pump 10 million gallons of water out of soil that didn't have any water, what would you call them? What would you call that kind of an inventor that could invent that? What do we do with the guy that invented the steam engine? Whoa, he is so smart. Albert Einstein,
Huh?
Huh?
No, that's on the dollar bill. That's the other genius.
I mean, we have so many people that we hold in such high esteem because they created a thumbtack. A thumbtack! And yet, we won't give any credit to the person who created the universe. Now, that's not all of us. But understand, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That's where we start learning. And a fool despises wisdom and instruction. If you don't believe in God, figure out why first. Figure out what it is that you don't want someone telling you to do. Because I think therein lies the key to going past the fear of the Lord and learning wisdom and instruction. We're out of time a whole lot before I wanted to be out of time this morning, but if your life is not right and you do believe in God and you do believe in Christ Jesus, make your life right this morning while you stand and sing the song that's been announced. Okay? Come while we stand.